me. Well, I want to welcome you to Christmas at the Movies. As we lead up to Christmas, we're going to look at themes of 3 Christmas movies and what the Bible says in regard to those themes. So it'll be this week, next week, and then the following week. Then on December 27th, the Sunday after Christmas, I'm excited to share with you that our very own Jonah Bogus is going to be preaching for us on December 27th. We're going to do just one service, just that Sunday after Christmas, and we're going to gather together as one body at 10 a.m. There won't be any Sunday school, so the one service will be at 10 o'clock, and Jonah is going to be sharing. Now, Jonah, of course, grew up in our church, and he is graduating this month from Johnson University with a degree in youth ministry. And so we've invited him to preach. So many of you who watched Jonah grow up, and I'm sure from stories I've heard, you can't believe that this kid's actually a preacher now. But he is going to preach. I'm excited. And I know how special it was for me when I was just young and starting out, and my home church would support me and invite me to preach. And Jonah's going to do a great job, so we're excited about that. Be sure to be with us that day. Well, preachers have been developing sermons from movie themes for some time now. In fact, going back in the archives of messages that have been preached here at FCC, Mark Bogus did a Christmas at the Movies series early in his years as the senior minister. Now, I've selected 3 different movies than what Mark chose when he did a similar series. Now, I have 2 all-time favorite Christmas movies. One of them is A Christmas Story, and that's the one we're not going to look at during this year. Maybe we'll take a look at it next year. But my other favorite Christmas movie is Christmas Vacation. How many of you have seen Christmas Vacation? You're familiar with it. It's a great, great movie. It is PG-13, so watch if you have little ones. There are parts that are not appropriate, but generally the movie is really, really funny. But it also has some messages in there, some themes in there that I think we'll be able to relate to as we work our way through this message. So we're going to spend time looking. It's the 1989 classic, Christmas Vacation. It starred Chevy Chase as Clark Griswold. Now, Clark is the atypical American. He has, he has an office job. He lives in a decent suburban neighborhood. He has a wife and 2 kids, and he desperately wants to create the perfect Christmas season for his family. And so the movie begins with the Griswold family on a journey to find the perfect Christmas tree. After a tension-filled drive to the snowy outpost somewhere in the Midwest, they trek across deep snow in a mission to find that perfect Christmas tree. And then Clark spots it, the Griswold family Christmas tree. Thus begins a series of mishaps in this movie that defines the entire Griswold Christmas experience. You know, the movie Christmas Vacation just makes us feel better about our own Christmas, because things are going to go wrong at Christmas time. They always do. And I think that's why Christmas Vacation is still so popular after 30 years. It's based in reality. We have our plans and we have our dreams, and we go at them really, really hard, and it never seems to go quite right. We all want that holly, jolly Christmas, but it rarely is ever holly or jolly. The reality of Christmas is the lights are not always going to work. Your family is going to drive you crazy. And you may not get the Christmas bonus you hope for. Or you may even overcook the Christmas turkey. But Christmas Vacation provides an excellent illustration of a challenge that every single one of us faces again and again throughout our lives. And it is a challenge which is most frequently felt at Christmas time. And I want to call it when the ideal meets the real deal. When the ideal meets the real deal. That is when our hopes and our dreams and our desires of what ought to be crash into what really, really is. Now, as we go back in time to the very first Christmas as recorded for us in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, we see ideals crushed by the real deal. The birth of Jesus was filled with problems and hardships. As a young, engaged couple, Mary and Joseph had this ideal picture in their mind of what their engagement would be like and what their wedding would be like and how family life after the wedding would be. And so they were busy planning their wedding day to enjoy with close family and friends. And then they planned to just settle into this normal life of a young Jewish couple living in the Galilean community of Nazareth. But then their ideal collided with the real deal. And you know, that's happened a lot here in 2020. Weddings have been planned and postponed, replanned and postponed again. My older daughter, Michelle, had what she thought was the ideal job, and then the real deal of COVID layoffs hit her. One of FCC's members, who I'm sure is watching today, was supposed to be celebrating her granddaughter's wedding this weekend with their family. But unfortunately, the wedding had to be canceled due to several family members testing positive for COVID. Prior to the pandemic hitting this past March, many of us here at church felt that FCC was gaining new momentum. We had new families with lots of kids were coming. Our worship team was expanding. We baptized several new people in February. Attendance was strong, and the future looked good. And then the ideal met the real deal, COVID-19. We shut down for 3 months. 9 months later, many in our church family have not yet come back for public worship. Our worship band and our vocalists have been cut just about in half. The present team is working harder than ever with half the amount of people. We've lost people from our staff. What do you do when your ideal meets the real deal? For Clark Griswold, the real deal overwhelmed his ideal, as it did to a young woman named Mary and her faithful fiancé, Joseph. Let me read from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. This is how Jesus, the Messiah, was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph, but before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, to whom she was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly. So he decided to break the engagement quietly. You know, today, unfortunately, it is quite common for unmarried couples to have children prior to or outside any plans to be married. But in the world and in the culture of Mary and Joseph, to be with child while you're pledged to be married, that brings great shame to not only the couple, but their family as well. It's no wonder in Luke, the Gospel of Luke tells us that Mary was greatly troubled upon hearing the news from an angel that she was pregnant. Greatly troubled. Does that sound like any of your Christmas pasts, where it just didn't go as you had hoped and planned and expected? I mean, this year, 2020, has almost all of us greatly troubled. But this is the reality of the first Christmas. And the troubles didn't just stop with Mary's unplanned pregnancy. Her fiancé is not the baby's father. So he gives serious thought to breaking the marriage proposal. When it's time to have the baby, they must travel several hundred miles to Joseph's hometown of Bethlehem to register for a national census. And Mary is 8.5 months pregnant. And the only means of transportation is on the back of a donkey. Well, then they get there, and all they see are no vacancy signs, as all the hotels are full. The only place they find to spend the night is in a dirty old barn. And if that isn't bad enough, being 8.5 months pregnant, she goes into labor that night. And this baby is coming whether they are ready or not. And then King Herod, after receiving word that a new king had been born, issues an edict that all males under 2 years of age will be killed, including Mary and Joseph's baby. And so they have to flee to Egypt in the middle of the night to escape this edict. Egypt, a place they have never been to. They were poor. They likely had never ever ventured out of Nazareth, much less to Egypt. You talk about the ideal getting pummeled by the real deal. This is it, folks, right here in Matthew. Now, in Christmas Vacation, Clark Griswold's disappointments occur in 3 areas of his life that I think all of us can relate to, and we also see in the biblical story. And the first area where he experienced disappointment was in his relational expectations. Fairly early in the movie, both Clark and Ellen's parents arrive a few days before Christmas. But their constant bickering begins to annoy the family. Clark, however, is maintaining this optimistic, positive attitude. He's determined that we're going to have a fun, old-fashioned family Christmas. But soon after that, Ellen's uncultured cousin Catherine and her unsophisticated husband Eddie, they arrive unannounced in their beat-up old RV with their children, Rocky and Ruby Sue, and their Rottweiler dog named Snots, appropriately named Snots. Now, Eddie is broke, and he has been forced to sell his home. And so he informs Clark that he has no money to buy Rocky and Ruby Sue Christmas gifts. And then Clark's senile Aunt Bethany and grumpy Uncle Lewis arrive as well. Well, you know, Mary and Joseph's troubles also have a relational aspect to them. How is Mary going to explain to her fiancé and her parents that she is pregnant, yet she's claiming that she's still a virgin? And additionally, she's claiming that she's about to give birth to the Son of God. She had to know they were going to think she's crazy. Joseph is likely going to end their relationship. Her parents will likely disown her due to the shame she has brought upon their family in this ultra-conservative Jewish community. I mean, how in the world will their extended family react when they find out? But you know, the Christmas season has a way of bringing to the forefront many of the relational troubles in our lives. Clark's family and Ellen's family, they might be difficult the rest of the year, but in Clark's hopeful mind, Christmas will somehow magically transform these people into beings of sweetness and light. And I think we can all relate to that, can't we? Because all of us really ever want is for our relationships, even the difficult relationships we have, to sort of magically evolve into delightful gatherings at Christmas time. But the real deal is they rarely do. The family comes and they bring with them their quirks, and they bring with them their issues, and they bring with them those things that just annoy you to no end. And so relational expectations is a challenge for Clark Griswold. It's a challenge for Mary and Joseph, and it is a challenge for you and I. Second area is in the area of emotional expectations. Emotional expectations. Now, through a bizarre series of events, if you've seen the movie, you'll know it. We don't really have time to go into it. But Clark gets locked in the attic while the rest of the family goes shopping. And he's kind of stuck in this cold attic. He has nothing else to do until they return. So Clark watches some old family movies. And as he's watching them, he's getting all emotional as he reflects on simpler times. Recently, I had all of our family's videos digitalized and stored on the cloud. So we can now watch family videos that I began shooting way back in 1985. And we could watch them on our iPad and on our iPhone and on our laptop. And my kids who are in their 30s absolutely love being able to watch these videos from their childhood. The other night, my wife was sitting in our living room and she was watching, a bit emotionally, a Christmas musical that our kids were in when we ministered back in Kettering, Ohio. So much of our connection to Christmas is emotional. This is why we wish people a Merry Christmas. After all, Christmas is supposed to be the happiest time of the year. And so we invest a lot of time and money in an attempt to fulfill and even surpass all of our emotional expectations for Christmas. When our girls were growing up, we had a tradition for Christmas Eve. We'd go to a Chinese buffet for Christmas Eve dinner after services at our church. Well, last year, and I knew our kids weren't going to be with us Christmas Eve, so I said to my wife, let's just go to the Chinese buffet after Christmas Eve services. And it was just the two of us, and my dad and Larry Hall joined us. And we had a great time, and it rekindled in me emotions from when our kids were still at home. They were young, and we would do that with them on Christmas Eve, and then we would go home and watch A Christmas Story. Now this year, I'm thinking about preparing a big seafood dinner for Christmas Eve. That is quite common among Italian families to have a big seafood dinner for Christmas Eve. I remember crazy spreads of all kinds of seafood from Christmas Eves of my childhood. And there's an emotional attachment to that. See, the emotional aspect of Christmas is why we listen to Christmas music that we've heard hundreds and hundreds of times before. It's why we watch holiday movies like Christmas Vacation or It's a Wonderful Life. We do it all in hopes of experiencing at least a taste of that wonderful feeling of Christmas. Mary experienced emotional unrest also during the events of the first Christmas. She must have had, expectations of what her emotions would be when somewhere out in the future she would be with child in the proper order after marriage. But with the way all of this happened and the ideal hitting the real deal, we find Mary was greatly troubled. She was confused. She was perplexed. She was scared. And you and I go through a lot of emotions at Christmas as well. Emotions that aren't always so comfortable. Now, a third area where Clark Griswold's idea got run over by the real deal is in the area of material expectations. Material expectations. Much of the story of Christmas Vacation surrounds Clark's plan to surprise his family by announcing on Christmas Day that he is having a built-in pool installed at their house in time for use next summer. And he's counting on a big, fat, nice bonus check from work to pay for it. Well, Clark begins to feel some anxiety when the bonus doesn't come before the holiday. And he really starts to get nervous when on Christmas Eve he still hasn't received his bonus. Then the doorbell rings, and a delivery person hands him an envelope. It's his Christmas bonus. He excitedly announces to the family his plans for the pool, and then he opens the envelope. Instead of the presumed big fat bonus, the envelope contains a free year's membership to the Jelly of the Month Club. And this just prompts Clark to snap. All of the disappointments and the discouragements he's been experiencing, they just all rush out of him at that very moment. How in the world is he going to pay for this pool, which his checking account is overdrawn from? How is he going to pay that with a membership in the Jelly of the Month Club? Well, Mary and Joseph, they faced the real deal of finances also. When they could afford no more than a barn to sleep in and give birth to their first child. And this year, more than any year past, we are facing the real deal of financial hardships due to the pandemic. Black Friday may have been replaced by Cyber Monday, but we still spend money on gifts we can't afford. And the people we're going to give it to really don't need anyway. You know, I read this week that 20% of people in America are still paying for last year's Christmas here in December of this year. The problem with that is if something goes wrong, let's say a pandemic, there's no margin for error. Well, Clark's Ideal Christmas has met the real deal of Christmas, and it is a disaster. And I think one thing is overwhelmingly obvious in this movie. It is when the ideal meets the real deal, the result is almost always disappointment. And here's why. Because the experience of the real deal never matches up with the vision of the ideal. The experience of the real deal never matches up with the vision of the ideal. And that holds true not just for Christmas, but for life in general. And all of us today know exactly what I'm talking about because we've all been disappointed when our ideals got run over by the real deal. And it's painful, and it's discouraging. And we often wonder, what's the point? Well, as we wrap this up, let's see how we can better handle times when the real deal crushes our ideal. In the area of relational expectations, let me suggest that you lower the relational expectations you have for other people, especially regarding their relationship with you. See, when you put your hope in people, you are going to be greatly disappointed because people disappoint us all the time. And this Christmas, with the whole COVID thing going on, I think we need to lower our relational expectations even lower than we've ever done before. Because this Christmas, it's likely that you won't be with family members that you usually gather with at Christmas. Perhaps you've lost a loved one, and that empty chair at the table is a constant reminder of the loss. This year, families should not gather together in large numbers. So if you're accustomed to large Christmas gatherings, you need to prepare yourself to be with a lot fewer people this year. Perhaps only those in your household. And don't be upset if family members choose to skip Christmas dinner with you because they're choosing to stay home this holiday. Or they don't invite you because they aren't comfortable with people coming to their house right now. Listen, while family and family relationships is an integral part of the Christmas experience, Christmas is really all about your relationship with God, not with your family. The God who was born in that manger so many years ago. And as much as you hope your earthly relationships are strong and protected, you need to be sure this Christmas that your relationship with Jesus is strong and protected. You need to lower your expectations for others, and you need to raise your expectations of your relationship with God. Number 2, in the area of emotional expectations, Christmas is an emotional experience. And emotions are seen all around the very first Christmas. There was fear, there was doubt, there was confusion, but also there was great joy, peace, and gratitude. And this Christmas season, be sure that your joy is found in Christ and not how the whole Christmas season shapes up for you. Understandably, some of you are grieving the loss of loved ones this past year, and joy is going to be really, really hard to find this Christmas. Perhaps you're discouraged because this Christmas, with finances so tight, you're not going to be able to get the kids or the grandkids everything you wish you could or have in the past. Or maybe the loneliness of this year is overwhelming you because we can't be together physically like we're accustomed to being together. You know, sometimes we have such high expectations of Christmas that we just set ourselves up for discouragement. We have this Norman Rockwell ideal Christmas in mind, and then when the children fight, or Christmas dinner is burned, or the lights don't come on, or the relatives arrive late, we get all up in sorts. I mean, we plan for things to go a certain way, but they didn't. And disappointment sets in. And that's why the Apostle Paul tells us to rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Well, this Christmas holiday will be so different than what we've previously experienced. The true emotions of Christmas ought to be found in who that baby in the manger really was and what he grew up to accomplish. The birth in the manger was the entry point for Jesus to come into our world to seek and save the lost, and that includes all of us. That hasn't changed. You may not have all the family over for Christmas. Some of the family, you might be thankful they're not coming this year. You may not be able to buy all the presents you wish you could, but Jesus is still your Savior. And COVID can't change that. So don't let anything dampen your joy in the Lord this Christmas, and don't lose your joy because of things that don't go the way you hope for. In the area of material expectations, let me give you some advice here. You know, advertisers and retail people, they count on your ideal. They really do. And your often unrealistic expectations during this Christmas season. So don't allow yourself to attach emotionally to the idea that to have a really, really great Christmas, you have to buy lots of big and expensive Christmas presents that you really can't afford to buy. Be careful this year with how much you spend this Christmas and how it's all going to get paid for in January or February or March or April or May, and you get the point. And so parents, grandparents, don't try to purchase your kids or your grandkids, love and gratitude with all sorts of expensive Christmas gifts you can't afford and they're not even going to care about by mid-January. Now, I've watched way too many parents overextend themselves at Christmas time. Whether it's for gifts or Christmas decorations, they got to do as best as the neighbor, or hosting Christmas parties. Here's a rule. If you can't afford it, don't do it. If you can't afford it, don't do it. Maybe this year you can do instead something good for someone less fortunate than you are. In Christmas Vacation, when Clark learns that Cousin Eddie can't afford to buy his kids Christmas presents, Clark steps up to the plate and he buys Rocky and Ruby Sue their Christmas gifts. I read this week about one family who each year designates 10% of the money they budget for Christmas gifts to go to a mission organization that the family and the children all choose together. Be generous this Christmas. Be generous to your church. Be generous to organizations and missions that provide for the needy and that share the gospel. Perhaps bless a family you know that is having an especially difficult time this year. I sent a struggling out-of-work single mom I know a cash gift the other day to allow her to buy her son and her something for Christmas. So don't think in terms of what you have to buy this year, but instead think of what you can give away financially to charities, to churches, to mission organizations, and to families who are in financial crisis this year. I want to wrap this up by sharing with you this passage from Ecclesiastes. Solomon, at the end of his life, is trying to figure out what the meaning and the purpose of it all is. And he comes to this conclusion. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Here is the conclusion of it all. Fear God. Whereas Clark Griswold focused all on the relational and the emotional and the material aspects of Christmas, Solomon says there is another dimension the spiritual dimension, which is far more important and even more foundational than relational, emotional, and material dimensions are. And attention to the spiritual dimension, Solomon says, that is the answer to the meaninglessness and the disappointments that seem to go along with being human. So this Christmas, don't make Christmas just about the relational and the emotional and the material. Don't leave out the spiritual aspect of Christmas. More importantly this year than ever, because it's likely your relational and your emotional and your material expectations will not be met this year. That's why it's even more important in 2020 COVID Christmas that you give a lot of attention to your spiritual dimension, to that spiritual part of your life. Because here's the ideal. The ideal life is spiritual. And if you make the ideal of Christmas spiritual, you won't be disappointed. So this Christmas, be sure that you give attention to that dimension of your life. And to help you do so, we'll start week 2 tomorrow. Every morning, and many of you watched them and have commented positively, we are posting video devotions on our YouTube channel and our Facebook. We're emailing out the links. And they're just short 3-4 minute devotions that kind of center our thoughts for the day. And they give you some additional scriptures to read and reflect on, some questions to think about. And so we're sending these out just to help each of you really, really focus on the spiritual dimension of Christmas. So take the time to watch them, take the time to read the scriptures and think about and reflect on the questions that are included. And then I want to encourage you to join us for Christmas Eve services, whether you do it online or in person. I guarantee you, if you come, your spirit is going to be lifted up. Now this Christmas, we are, because of some of the restrictions that we're under and some of the manpower we've got, we are just going to do the one Christmas Eve service. It's going to be at 4 o'clock here, and we're going to be online as well. And whether you join us live or online, be sure to join us, because I've looked over. Taika has sent me the order for the service, and it's going to be a very, very special service. It's going to be very, very meaningful, and it's going to help us connect in that spiritual dimension we need to connect during this time of year. Have you ever had that experience where you just didn't want to go to church, but you came anyway? And during the service, something happened, and you just felt so much better, and you said, man, I'm so glad I went. And your bad mood was erased, and you left so much more upbeat. Well, that's what's going to happen to you if you join us for our Christmas Eve service. Now, 4 o'clock doesn't work out for you. We're going to have that service just replaying on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it at any time that may be a little bit more convenient for you. So be sure to join us in person or online this Christmas Eve.